All right, so like Scott said, things are a little bit different with these breakout sessions. We don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to try to squeeze in a lot of stuff and a lot of information into one PowerPoint. But don't worry, there's a QR code at the end. If you like something, you want to keep it, you'll be able to scan that. But like he said, I'm Josh Walker. I'm the athletic director at Booneville. I'm also the junior high principal, so that makes me a little bit crazy, having that dual role. But today, we want to provide some value for all types of athletic directors. Do we have any new athletic directors in here? All right, good. So hopefully you'll get some value from this as you begin to look and hire for your programs. We also want to provide value for those that have done it for a long time. So maybe provide some thought-provoking things that you could think about as you invest in your program in the future. This is the lens that I want us to look through today. The most important decision an AD makes is who gets access to your kids. Now, this is true in all of education, but it's even more true when you think about our coaches, because our coaches have extensive access to our kids. They're with them outside of school hours, on long trips, late nights. So the people you hire really matter. And just like Coach Aaron told us earlier, the effect that a coach that has power over kids is great. So we want to make sure we get the right people for that. So this is the lens I want us to look at today as we go through this.
Okay, so I'm going to visit with you a little bit about from the posting to the preparation of hiring this candidate. The posting, that's an opportunity for you to develop that job description. What sports is that coach going to be attached to? What content area is that coach going to be attached to? You're probably going to be working with your building principal on that. You're going to gather your resumes. All of our resumes are gathered through Talent. Can you hear me? Talent Ed, which is, I think, through Power School. All the screening is done through that program. We do video interviews, that kind of thing. But and your district may be a little bit different. We work very heavily with our HR department on some of these things. They take care of the background check, and then the last thing we'll do is check references. When we have a candidate that we feel like we want to offer the job to, that's when we will call those references. Looking at red flags, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. What's their track record? Have they hopped from one school to another, or are they building a career from starting at a small school, being an assistant coach, then going to a small school as a head coach, so forth? Are they building that career? Admin check-in for us. Our admin is highly involved in our hiring process. We have an administrator, an assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent that is in all of those job interviews along with the building principal, but making sure that you have got a good fit there and that they're compliant in terms of their teaching licensure. No one gets a video interview that does not have a license in Fort Smith, so that helps. But this is kind of how you go from posting that position to hiring.
All right, so looking at the broad, y'all can just keep that. Looking at the broad spectrum of interviewing, there's certain things that you have to do in a process that you have to go through, but really, it all boils down to 3 non-negotiables that you need to look for in your candidates as you're searching for your next coach. They are passion, character, and a process. So we'll go through each one of those, starting with passion. I'm not going to ask you to raise hands, but I'm sure many of you have worked with people who had lost their passion, or maybe they never had their passion. But passion is extremely important. It's important for educators in general, because you have to have a big why. We've always heard people talk about Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. You've got to have a deeper meaning behind what you do. I go back to the Vince Lombardi quote where he says, if you aren't fired with enthusiasm, you will be fired with enthusiasm. Now, that's not super simple in the education world. We can't just fire people just because they're not good. We've got to take certain steps to go through that. But I think it's more simple to have a really good interviewing strategy process going through so that you never have to get to the point where you want to fire someone. So passion is extremely important. So we're going to give you a few questions that you can ask in your interviews that might reveal passion.
All right. This is a big thing for me. When I go to interview people is, like I said, I don't look at state championships. I don't look at a lot of things because bottom line is when you remove all the wins and losses, what do you really have? Are you going to have a person that cares about kids? Because a lot of times, like I said, I remember the coach that helped me through some tough times in my life when I was in high school when my sister was doing stupid things. I remember that coach, but I don't remember. I honestly can't tell you the record we had. So what is their passion for? Why do you coach? Do you coach for the wins or do you coach for kids? Do you have a passion for the game or passion for both? Those are important. Says, tell me about a player. Well, that's one of my favorite things. Tell me about a player that wasn't the most talented, that you impacted. Tell me. I always say, tell me a story about a kid you helped. That way, it's talented, not talented. And you sit in there when that face lights up and you can see them, they're telling it, because I can still tell you the story of my greatest accomplishment, and it has zero to do with wins and losses. And I can talk to you for an hour about the young lady. I coached girls basketball. It meant something. And to this day, I get introduced to her kids. She hugs me, introduces me to all of her family as her coach. That's one of, we all know that's a term of endearment most generally. So if they still call you coach when they're in their 30s and 40s, you know you've done something right. What do you develop, or what do you do to develop a profession? Well, again, I believe, I'm the old school guy, believes that there's some things that I've done for 30 years and I'm going to continue to do for 30 years if I'm in it. But there's also some things that I don't need to do that I did 30 years ago because it's a different life, different kids. So what are they doing to do that? Well, I watch YouTube videos. What are you going to sharpen, iron sharpens iron. What are you going to do? What area are you going to make yourself uncomfortable in to make us better? When I say us, we're in this together, because if I have to fire too many of them, they're wanting to fire me, because that's the way it goes, all right? What does your off season look like? Do they have a plan? That's the biggest thing of their passion and stuff, is if they have their passion, they're constantly working at it. Our girls basketball coach we just hired this year, he literally was talking to me as we're getting ready to go to regionals down at Paris. He's talking to me about what we're going to do. If I lose today, here's what we're going to do tomorrow. If I don't, we'll do it next week, the following week, or whatever. He's got a plan. He's ready to make these kids better. What part of coaches energize you? If they're sitting there telling you, I hate this, and the jury, do they have that passion? Again, those are the things that sometimes. What is your least favorite? Because if they'll do the least favorite with passion, they'll do everything else fine. So. And most of us are in this. Do you enjoy teaching? I'm a big believer in, if you're passionate, you do anything like you do everything, and you do everything like you do anything. If you're going to half-heart it, I'll say it, my dad had a different word for it. If you're going to half-heart it over here in the classroom, you're probably at some point going to half-heart it on the court, the field, or whatever. But if you don't have passion, I have passion when I'm raking a field for our softball coach, because we're going to do it right. So again, those are some things. Does anybody else have a favorite question and passion that they have, that they usually ask? Anybody? Melinda, you got anything that you usually ask a coach? Those, yeah. So, but passion, how do you find it? You got to find it, and because sometimes it's not about the wins and losses. It's just about the kids that you impact and the correct fit. Is their passion fit our passion? And what they're passionate about fit what we're passionate about. So, again, passion, how do you find it?
One thing I want to add to that, if you look at question number 3, like as an AD, we all have coaches. This is a question that I ask my coaches now. What are you doing to develop professionally? If they don't have somebody that they're trying to emulate or a coach that they're researching, one thing I started doing was in my postseason evaluations, I will find a book like The Art of Winning, Bill Belichick, give that to my football coach. Or a Pat Summit book, give it my girls basketball coach. Or John Wooden for my boys basketball. So I think that's something everybody can use when we're talking to them in postseason evaluations. What are you doing to develop professionally? Because that's something we've all got to do. The second non-negotiable is character. Obviously, you want to hire somebody with great character. This is the most important thing for us, right? Because what's your number one priority? Safety of your kids. You've got to find people of good character. If you don't have good character, you end up in the headlines. Their name may be first, but yours is going to be second, along with the school district. Any of us want to find ourselves in that boat. Warren Buffett said it takes 20 years to build a reputation, and only 5 minutes to run it. That's something to think about whenever we go and interview people and pick our next coach.
So as Josh mentioned, we're not only trying to reveal what the passion, those coaches that have passion, but also those coaches that have character. And you're going to be looking for someone that's going to do the right thing even when no one's watching. That's the big thing, when no one's watching. So these questions are a guide for maybe some that you have used already or that you could use. I tend to run some questions, pose the question to ChatGPT. I'm interviewing this coach, a volleyball coach. What are some questions that I could ask during this interview that would reveal their character? And they come up with some pretty good ideas. The big thing for me is, let's take number one. Tell me about a time you were wrong. I'm going to just ask, tell me about a time that you were wrong. How did you handle that situation, and what did you learn from that? Because that's what really reveals the character of, because we all make mistakes. We're all going to have a time that we're wrong, but the character's revealed in how did you handle it and what did you learn from that. Disagreements with admin, disagreements with parents. What's a situation that you had to have a difficult conversation with administrator or with a head coach, and how did that conversation go? What did you learn from that? What happened after that? Safeguards. What safeguards do you use in communicating with athletes? I think we all know that we should not be friends with our athletes on social media. That's probably going to be, it might be kind of a stock answer. So, tell me about a player you had to discipline. What was the outcome of that situation? And how did you communicate with the parent the outcome of that situation? Those are all questions that reveal character. And by putting that tag after that, how did you handle that? What did you learn? I think that you're going to get a really good idea of the character of that candidate.
So the third non-negotiable is a process. And when you think about this, and I want you to think about Nick Saban, his process, how that filtered down to the Saban disciples, right? We all saw what Indiana did this year with the Indiana football program with Kurt Signetti and his staff. Like, they did that. Yeah, they had some help, NIL money and transfer portal, stuff like that. But you can have all the money in the world. You can have the best talent, but if you don't have a process, it's not going to be successful. So you got to have a coach with a process. And this primarily is concerned with head coaches, but you want to have a process. They've got to reveal that they have a process. Like Nick Saban said, you don't focus on winning, you focus on what it takes to win. So here's some questions that would follow that line.
I know when we do questions to reveal a process, sometimes we've had this done when we hired a football coach. We actually said, we had our final three. We had them come in to our committee and said, coach us up on something. And you find out a lot about them. Some of them go strictly to X's and O's. We had an awesome candidate come in, and he went all about leadership and positivity and all this stuff. And I mean, like, you ask these questions and have them teach something, you'll learn their process real quick, what's important to them. So, but walk me through a typical practice plan. I've had coaches that's had very detailed and, pages of stuff and had all this out so everybody knew everything. And I had some that's had it written on a card, both highly effective. But they had a process and they went through it. Because, so how do you plan for the entire year? Well, I just do what I do. Well, last year you had a 6-4 post. This year you have a 5-2 post. What are you going to do? Of course, I'm speaking about basketball. Sometimes men's basketball has that. What are you going to do? You're going to do the same thing? I doubt it. So what are you going to do to plan? How are you going to make that successful? You don't have to change your entire program, but you'll find out that they make micro changes that benefit their kids. Or are they just going to hope that everybody adapts? If you're in a small school like us, if you do that, you're not going to be very successful at times. So, how do you measure fundamentals in practice? I'll be honest with you, this is a big one for me because a lot of coaches nowadays don't focus on fundamentals. Me and Norman were talking last night about his 1989 at Gentry that they got ready to go to the state championship game, and those girls are out there still wearing their dribble goggles, keeping them from looking down, because that's what they did. That was their process. Every day, we're going to do this. They didn't turn the ball over much. So how do you teach your system to assistant coaches? I just had a coach talk with my boys coach about that. It's like, how do you get your assistant more involved? How do you feel like you did? Well, I didn't do very good. I got to do a better job of making sure I delegate more to him instead of less to him. So you find out about it. How do you ensure consistency from year to year? Like I said, ask those open-ended questions, not yes, no questions, and then describe your evaluation system for athletes. You can sometimes, it's just by watching them, they're under pressure. I've watched them by, if they're dedicated to discipline on those things, if they're dedicated to discipline in the classroom. Because if they're always getting in trouble in classroom, guess what's going to happen when you least need it in a basketball game or a football game? They're going to be undisciplined. So what am I going to do? I'm going to tell you how I'm going to do it. What are they going to do? So again, anybody else got anything about the process or anything that they would like to share? Like I said, we're here to learn from each other.
Okay. Now with all of those, you're going to have some things that you're looking for as red flags or things you should be cautious of. So we're going to cover some red flags.
Red flags. I think this first one is one of every one of us when we're asking questions and they get defensive. Well, that was all because of, or, well, that assistant coach, they get defensive or deflective. You find out a lot about them. What I want, one of the big things, I love that book, Extreme Ownership, about a Navy admiral that just went in. He could have blamed 100 things, but he said, bottom line is I didn't get the job done. And it made him a better leader. So do they get defensive or do they blame other athletes? Because a lot of times I know I've sat in front of my superintendent and said, well, buck stops here. I was in charge of it. I could point fingers, but it's not going to do any good because I should have fixed it. It's what you got to do sometimes. Leadership is leadership. I've not always been that well. So, like I said, has structure or plan has no structure. Well, I just kind of how it goes, how it feels. Exactly, you end up with that. Cannot articulate non-negotiables or standards. I love that question. What's your non-negotiable? Well, I don't know. I really never thought about it. Well, okay. That's all I need to know because they haven't thought about it. Great coaches reflect all the time. I think not just at the end of the season, but from game to game. Make adjustments. One of the best things I see sometimes is even in-game adjustments. You're reflecting. Okay, well, this was my game plan. It really didn't work like I thought it was. What am I going to do? Did you reflect on it? Uses sarcasm when talking about players or previous administration. All right, again, it goes back. Red flags I always said was when I looked through part of the process was when you're looking through there and their past administration is not even on their reference list. Good or bad, it needs to be on there. So talks only about themselves, doesn't mention the kids. One of the big things is they come in and they start telling me about their record. I'm not a big records guy. I'm just not. Because records, you could jump from talent to talent to talent and never be a good coach. I always say this, a monkey could do what some people do with talent. But a true coach can coach any talent. It's when you don't have talent, it tells you what kind of coach you are. So if you're talking about your record all the time and that's it, I'm not saying a record's a bad thing. What I'm saying, if that's the only thing you got your hat to hang on, I just don't think that, I think that's a red flag. Talks about wins. We're led right in it. Doesn't have any questions for you. One of my favorite things is when they come in and they know your school district, they've done homework, and then also they just have questions like, what is this going to entail? How does this? Don't ask me once I got you hired. Ask me before I get you hired. Reluctant to agree part of jobs. Well, because one of ours is if you're going to coach, you're going to get your CDL. Because I can't guarantee you a driver unless you have. I don't like my coaches driving, but sometimes I don't have an option. So if they're like, well, I just don't think it's. Well, number one, that's part of the job. Well, what's the next thing they're going to say? Well, I just really don't like sweeping the gym floor. Well, I just don't really like coming into summer and opening the gym for them. At some point, they're going to get tired of all that. But again, you do anything like you do everything. So again, what are some red flags? That you could, anybody else got, again, this is not just about us. This is just stuff that has came up in, my 18 years as an AD and 33 years in education that you notice that. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Yes. All right.
So once you go through all the red flags, make sure there's none of those. You've got your non-negotiables. You feel good about the candidate. This next step, really for new ADs, but it's going to look different in every school district. So Jennifer's going to cover what you do once you have your candidate.
Okay, so when you have your candidate selected, you've checked your references, those types of things. It says here you need to talk to your admin. As I mentioned before, in Fort Smith, our admin, district admin, building admin, they are involved in that process. They have done a lot of the background work for us in terms of background checks, licensure, that kind of thing. You want to introduce them to the superintendent. And typically in Fort Smith, our last statement in an interview is we're going to turn in our recommendation to the Human Resources Department, and the next call will be from them. And one thing that does is that takes a lot of the pressure off of you to not be getting those calls from those candidates, but it also means that the next step has to be an offer from our HR department. And then it says up here somewhere, don't tell the candidate that they've got the job before they've been approved by the board, because things happen. In a small school, in a big school, you've got somebody's cousin out there that's a board member's cousin, and the last minute candidate, and then the next thing you know, the person that you told had the job informally doesn't have the job anymore, and then you're apt to a lawsuit there. Make sure you're clear on your standards. Schedule periodic meetings ahead of time to help them grow. This is key. Once you hire a candidate, the onboarding process by you is critical. There is an onboarding process that your district will typically handle for new teachers and that kind of thing, but people do not live up to your expectations because they don't know what those are. So I always say somebody messes up because it's a matter of will or skill. Okay, the skill part is on us as ADs. We have to communicate those expectations and those things that they have to do in the bounds of district employment. But if we do not communicate those, they really have no way to be successful, and that's on us. Now, if you've communicated those, then that is a matter of will, and that's a different conversation. But I'm a firm believer on setting our new hires up for success.
And lastly, we're going to leave you with this thought. The people you hire determines the culture that you live with. You think about that. Those are the ones with your kids. Those are the ones running your programs. Those are the ones that are supposed to be leaders that are leading each one of your programs. We got to do a good job leading them, but in turn, we want to make sure they know exactly what Jennifer was talking about, what our expectations are, our standards are, and then we're following through with those. But your culture will be determined by people. It's all about people. So here is the QR code if you'd like the presentation. If you have any questions, you can there's our contact information. And I appreciate you all and your attentiveness.